Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, here's Saqib Keval, an amazing artist and chef that I wanted to bring to our class today virtually. So hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I was really hoping that Saqib and I could just talk a little bit about some of his ongoing projects with People's Kitchen Collective and Masala y Maiz, and think about, why do this work at any time, and especially why do this work now in the midst of a crazy global pandemic, uh, right? No big deal.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. Yeah. So Saqib, where are you right now? Let's just jump into that.
I'm at our house in Mexico City.
Okay. How's the weather? Is it warm?
Yeah, it's been raining off and on, but it's sunny and fine. It's fine. It's not like we can enjoy it because we're staying inside and being responsible people. But yeah, the weather's fine.
Good. Well, I'm glad that's fine. I hope you're doing okay. Otherwise, today you look beautiful, bathed in the light.
Definitely not going crazy.
Okay, good.
Definitely did not buzz cut my hair out of exasperation.
You're being sarcastic, right? Because it looks shorter than last time I saw you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to start. I mean, I didn't have a super kind of strict order of events, but I actually wanted to share the story of how I met you, because I feel like my first meeting of you really set the stage, even before I knew of your work, about the kind of person that you were. And I don't know if you remember this, actually.
I don't, but tell me.
You might not, because I think we might have been a little bit tipsy.
That's a safe guess. Feel free to add any embellishments.
Okay, yeah. You were wearing a bright purple suit, and it was a Prince party. I'm not sure, but I think it was a Prince party, maybe. But it was at the Den, and it was in a line outside of the Den. And if folks have been to Oakland, the Den was, because it's no longer there, right?
Not that I know of.
Right. The Den was, at least on Wednesday nights, a safe haven and a spot for queer folks of color in Oakland to get together, and specifically like kind of more grown folks, because it was a Wednesday night party.
Yeah. Grown and responsible.
Grown and responsible. It ended by midnight. And I remember that when I was in line, and I just recently moved to Oakland, and I didn't know that many folks, and you were there in line, and I think we had a mutual friend or something. And that mutual friend that we ended up talking about was a dear friend who is now passed on, Candace Rice. And knowing that you knew Candace, who passed from breast cancer several years ago, an incredible activist, organizer, scholar, ethnic studies PhD from Compton, right, who had gone to Humboldt State, and knowing that you knew her and her family, who are so much tied to, right, the legacy of the Black Panthers and community organizing. I knew that you were good people, and also you were in line for
a good party.
Club. Yeah. And over the years, in terms of our interactions, because we have sometimes lived in the same city and sometimes not, I feel like you've always been in and amongst other queer communities of color and other sites of struggle, but struggle and joy. Struggle through spaces of play and through dance and through coming together. And that was why I wanted to actually bring you today and ask you if you could share a little bit about People's Kitchen Collective, right? And then Masala y Maiz, and kind of what brought you to doing this work. And so I'm also gonna pull up some screen shares and ask if you could talk a little bit first about, maybe your own trajectory in terms of how you got into food, and specifically then how you connected with Sita and Jocelyn and started the People's Kitchen Collective.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So is the audio levels okay?
You sound great.
Great. Look at this. This is so nice.
Okay. There's some slides, some pictures.
Yeah, they're so official. So I got into cooking and activist work, really, and community work through my family. I grew up in a really big family, really big immigrant family, originally from North India, but immigrated to East Africa, to Kenya and Ethiopia and before, and also Zanzibar and Uganda and Tanzania. And have been there for about 300 years. So really old immigrants.
Wow.
But always like has stayed with the, like our.
Oops. Uh-oh, I think you got muted, Saqib.
God damn it. All right.
It's okay. It was just when you said when they immigrated.
Yeah. So immigrated, my family's been in East Africa for about 300 years. Mm-hmm. But I've always stayed culturally connected to South Asia, but a very diasporic family. And that's been important because my cooking, my relationship to food and culture, and has been very much informed by the diaspora and by migration. Mm-hmm. So growing up in this really big family, cooking and feeding each other and feeding community was a big part of what we do, has always been. So I grew up cooking for hundreds of people. Like my family in California alone, that live within 2 hours of each other, just to put a number out there, is like easily 200 some odd people. And that's just people that live within a few hours of each other. That's not including family out of state, across the US, in Canada, in France, in UK, like all over the world. There's a ton of us. So the way we have kept the way I learned about our family culture and traditions was through our recipes and looking at how this recipes and migration kind of went hand in hand, and the way our culture was created over the years and through migration. It looks like we lost Dr. T. All right, well, I'll keep going to all these black screens. But yeah, so I started cooking at a really young age in my family, and was always fascinated by the way how our recipes can tell stories, right? And that's how, like I was saying, that's how I learned about all the family stories and how our culture was kept alive from generation to generation, how our language was kept alive. So cooking was always something that's really important to me. My first job was in restaurants, and I kind of stayed working in restaurants after that. And it was always like restaurant work and something else, like restaurant work and organizing work. My family, very socially active, always advocating for, I'd say advocating for other people and advocating for other communities was always a very big part of our culture. Our religion, basically our upbringing was always take care of those around you and take care of those who can't take care of themselves or who don't have the same access to resources that you do. I started People's Kitchen as a political project about 12 years ago now. And at that time, it was just me, not just me, but I say just me in that it was People's Kitchen, and this is before it became a collective. So People's Kitchen was this, basically this project that started as a way of bridging my restaurant life and organizing life. So I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but basically, the restaurant industry that I came up in is, as some of you may know who work in the food industry, it's really strange talking to a screen like this and not being able to see you all and ask you questions. But I'm sure somebody here has worked in the restaurant industry, and you know how fucked up the industry can be, and you know how abusive it can be, and you know how it's kind of an industry that's built on taking advantage of people, of basically the most vulnerable people. And that's predominantly immigrant communities, Black and brown folks, poor folks who are overworked, underpaid, and basically they're the backs that the restaurant industry is built off of. It's the labor of Black and brown people, the labor of immigrants and undocumented folks in the food system that keep the industry moving forward. And the restaurant, as we know it in the West, is built off of this basically built off of the French military and uses the model of the French military. So you can imagine with that comes all the fucked up shit from the military, the intense patriarchy, abuse, sexism, basically everything that makes the military something that we don't support, or that I don't support, I should say. It's like myriad of overlapping systems of oppression. So I'm been knee deep in this industry that's admittedly very fucked up and has very fucked up roots. And at the same time, I was always doing organizing work, some type of community building work. And for me, that was as much about my own survival, especially when I lived in this like Humboldt, which had the largest active Klan population on that side of the Mississippi, and intense white supremacy there. Community organizing work made me feel safe, and made me felt like I had a community. That's why I met Candace, that Dr. T was talking about earlier. So People's Kitchen Collective kind of started as this a way of bridging the two worlds. This was years ago, before pop-ups were really a thing, and before the restaurant industry went through the big changes that's gone through over the last couple of years. So basically at that time, the way we did these meals were after hours in the restaurant that I was working in, or on the off days, we're using the kitchen there to do prep and having organizing meetings there. If you work in the restaurant industry, basically you're working when everyone else is off. So you don't really get free time at the same hours that other people do. So by kind of bringing the organizing meetings to the kitchen and bringing the kitchen to the organizing meetings, it made it possible for me to kind of participate in both. And it was basically also looking at and understanding how food is such an integral part of social justice work, of organizing work, around building community. And that kind of started my deep dive into food as a tool of radical organizing and community building. People's Kitchen went on for quite a few years before, I don't remember what year, but it's on our website. I have a terrible memory. But before, when I met Sita and Jocelyn in Oakland, in California, and we in Oakland, and we created People's Kitchen Collective and officially formed the collective, basically with the recognition that as a collective, we could do so much more than what we as individuals can do. Sita and Jocelyn both come from epic backgrounds of being cooks and activists and artists and researchers and scholars and teachers, and they've both worn many, many, many different hats and have lived like many lifetimes. And that was something really cool to be able to connect with them and build a collective and build a really strong collective. And it happened right when I was thinking that People's Kitchen was done. That I couldn't keep going like that, because I was getting really burnt out, because I wasn't asking for help. I wasn't resourcing myself for the long term. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was kind of putting all of myself into the project, into People's Kitchen, and I didn't really have a clear long-term goal or vision of how it would continue beyond me. And that's where the collective comes in.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if I could ask a little bit here, if you can expound on, what the collective model does, right? For you, for Sita, for Jocelyn together, and also how you made some of the key partnerships that you have. I mean, I had the privilege of going to one of the dinners. I think it might be the one that's pictured here on this slide, that was over at Elena Studios in West Oakland. And I would love for you maybe to walk folks through, how even when dinner comes together, and I know that's a huge process, but shorthand, right? In terms of thinking about collectivity and bringing in different stakeholders into this process.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to focus now, because I've been I feel like I just rambled all over the place while you were gone.
That was the most beautiful ramble, and I did hear in my video just kind of.
All right, so let's do this. So I've spent quite a few years working on collectives, specifically collectives in the food industry, and looking at the power of collectives. And like I said, collectives are great for a lot of reasons, one of which is you can accomplish much more as a group than you can as an individual. but there's something really beautiful about creating a project like People's Kitchen Collective and doing these meals, because it, one of the things we talk a lot about in the kitchen is the more hands that touch the meal, the better the flavor, right? So the more people involved in it, the better it's going to turn out. That's a really nice way of saying, like, you can't have too many chefs in the kitchen. Yeah. Which is kind of the opposite of what you would say in most kitchens.
Or at home.
But it's something like, or at home, or in our restaurant, Masala y Maiz. But it's this idea that we've designed People's Kitchen Collective to be this collective process in every aspect of it, right? In the way that the recipes are created, the way the art's curated, the way the experience is kind of rolled out. To give you some background, so the way these meals function and what People's Kitchen does, if you're not familiar, is we basically tell the stories of political movements, or immigrant histories, or farm worker rights movements, or what have you. Basically untold stories, and we tell them through food. And we'll focus on political movements and immigrant histories, and then serve the recipes that have kept that community alive or kept that movement going forward. This involves months and months and months of research, interviews, and basically, as we're working on a concept, as we're working on a menu, we're bringing in a lot of stakeholders. You can see in this slide here, this is you see on the left-hand side, that's the altar at our free breakfast program. That's a replication of the Black Panthers free breakfast program that we do every year in West Oakland for upwards of 800 people in the streets. And then on the upper right-hand corner, you'll see one of the elders who works with us, who's one of the JSA elders, basically elders that have, Japanese elders that have been working, who survived internment or the children of internees, and who have been organizing to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. And they've been a huge cornerstone for us of, wisdom and guidance and a lot of research. On the bottom right, you'll see a bowl of food that was served at that year's free breakfast program. Generally, it involves some combination of grits, scrambled eggs or scrambled tofu, like a spiced, like a masala tofu, collards, salad, sweet potato biscuits, things like that. And the idea is like everything that we serve is hyper local and organic and nutritious, but also pulling from a lot of staples that the Black Panthers served at their free breakfast program, but with a Bay Area twist, of course. So yeah, the collective. So one of the things like that, one of the things we pride ourselves in that's kind of central to our organizing model is bringing in a lot of voices and centering the work that we do on the voices that are least represented, right? The people who have the most at stake. And we do that through our research. We do it through the way we pick our recipes, but also in the actual meals themselves. So you asked, how do the dinners come together, put together over the course of many months, a lot of work. And then the actual day of the meal, we bring together maybe 20 to 50 to 100 volunteers who are all like the extension of the collective, kind of our core group. We've been cooking at that point over the last couple of days, doing prep and inviting rotating crews of folks to be in the kitchen with us, to touch the meal, to be part of the cooking process, and be part of the conversations that happen during the cooking process. Because of course, while we're cooking, we're also having discussions. We're having like teach-ins in the kitchen. There's discussion prompts, a lot of like using that time basically to do education and political education, and to get everyone kind of dialed into the concept that we're preparing the meal for. And then the actual meal itself, we try to make it feel as much of a, like, not a restaurant dining experience, but a kind of an immersive food experience. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, you walk in and like, you can see that frame on the right in the Lena Studios. You see like the walls are covered in art. The tables, which you can't see, like the tables have a very specific place setting that was designed for that meal. That goes down to the plateware, the glassware, the napkins, the what's written on the menus, the way the menus are presented, and basically from start to finish, from the moment you come in to the moment you leave, everything is kind of facilitated by a crew of artists, activists, farmers, speakers, and every course is kind of, the goal of it is like every course slowly builds on the political education, and there's all these different touch points, like the ways you're interacting with the art in the room, the sounds, the music, the poetry, whatever. But the idea is that it's this like wholly immersive, like kind of social practice art project that is told through food. And you're using all your senses to engage with whatever the theme of that meal is, and what are the topics that we're exploring. The goal of it, of these meals, is kind of to inform and engage people. We say like, it's not only, People's Kitchen Collective is not only to fill your stomach, but also nourish your mind, and feel the movement, right? We're trying to get people out on the street. We're trying to get them to create relationships at the table, build community, and then get out on the street to advocate for the issues that matter most.
Absolutely. And I would say, as someone that has had the privilege of coming to your dinner, possibly even that dinner that's pictured on the bottom right, so I was looking for my own pictures, but they're buried somewhere on another computer, is that it actually does happen that way. Like, I met some incredible people that I'm still in touch with, some different artists that have come, gone on to show here in Seattle even. I met a curator, a community educator, PJ Policarpio, I think, at that dinner, and we connected with another amazing Filipinx activist there, Dorothy Santos, who's a great friend of mine. You know, and it was this really amazing space to meet new folks and feel too that you were with a real community. Like, it didn't feel like a weird networking dinner or like a foodie event, right? Or like some too cool like gathering, like foodie gathering. It actually did feel like a space where folks who were invested, especially in questions of ending white supremacy, and specifically in the context of West Oakland and that building, especially how to keep Black-owned homes and businesses in West Oakland, that felt really present and really grounded. In terms of the dinners that you held in that space, for sure. Yeah,
during the earlier ramble, I was talking about the roots of the restaurant industry and the roots of kind of the modern restaurant design in the West, right? It's something that's built, restaurants are built in a framework of white supremacy. They're meant to uphold, created to uphold the values of white supremacy, of capitalism, of patriarchy, of sexism, and basically all those horrible isms. Like, everything comes to work there. At the core of it, right, is this deeply undervaluing the labor of undocumented folks, of Black and brown folks, of poor working class folks. But
the folks who are putting the food on the table.
Right. The restaurants are generally really white spaces, right? If you think about restaurants that you've been to, think about who, like when you walk in, normally the host predominantly is going to be like a 20-something white, generally a woman, or woman presenting, like female presenting. And then like basically as you go through the dining experience, the further back, like, and then you get to, you know, you have your server who's probably going to be fair-skinned, male presenting, but pretty light-skinned still. And like basically as you get to the further, what's called the back of house is the kitchen. The darker the skin color of the people working get. And the less they're paid and the less visible the labor is, until you get to the dish pit where the dishwashing is happening. And that's generally like darker skinned or undocumented person, all the way down. And the meal doesn't end at the restaurant, right? Then you need to think about who's collecting the waste, the compost, who's taking out the recycling, right? And basically down the line you go in the food chain, the darker the skin color gets, the less visible the labor, the more likely to abuse that they're experiencing. And the further away from the diner that it is, right? And people pay for that. People pay for the experience of making labor invisible.
And
That's
of
one of the
literally being
things,
closer to whiteness in that way.
and being closer to whiteness, right? And that's one of the things that restaurants have been really based off of for many, many years. Thankfully, that's changing now, and we're seeing more people of color owned restaurants. And there's really cool changes happening in the food industry. But in creating People's Kitchen, well, what our charge has always been is like, what does it look like to decolonize the restaurant? What does it look like to make it more community-based? And what does it look like to center the voices of the Black and brown folks, queer folks, undocumented people? One of the ways that happens, right, is when you come in, all the diners, everyone that's involved in it, basically are told, like, especially white folks who come in, like, hey, check your privilege, like, you know, you're sitting down, but this is not your place to talk. Like, this is about people of color. You're free to talk, of course, but just recognize how much you're talking, how much space you're taking up at the table. And we have the people who are serving the food there, who are not servers, they're in service. They're going around and kind of facilitating at the tables and making sure that that space is made for folks that generally don't have space made for them to speak. Everyone that cooks the food, right, is very vocal and present throughout the dining experience. You're talking to the people who prepared your food. At the end of the meal and before the meal, right, everyone's introduced. There's rounds of gratitude for the people that prepared the food. But basically, we're trying to look at, like, how do we decolonize the restaurant space? And there's a lot of small ways that we do.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great segue, actually, to talk a bit about Masala y Maiz, the restaurant that you started with your partner. And in terms of how that even happens, the next slide was actually the older version of the restaurant, or the second iteration, right? Because you've now moved on to the third iteration. But I wanted
this was the first iteration.
Right, the first restaurant that I saw last summer when I was in Mexico City. These are just some pictures that I took. And here you can think spatially about, you know, the long communal table that went from, it was beautiful and dramatic, but it also said something politically, right? In terms of, again, why a communal table and not, you know, solo diner spaces, or, you know, groups of 2 to 4, right?
Yeah.
How do people enter the space, and who can be in this space?
Yeah, I miss that. I miss that table. It had a way of making people behave better. Basically, like this one long table, you're sitting next to each other. It only sat 26 people, and that was it. That was the whole restaurant. And basically, people sat next to each other, having vastly different experiences, but ultimately all their experiences kind of come together and fuse together. You had people like passing plates from their table to the people sitting next to them, or in line for each other. I really, like, that was a cool space of kind of breaking in the concept of what Masala y Maiz is, and building, like, trying this restaurant out and kind of trying out what we want to do. Because we opened the restaurant in 3 months, which is unheard of. Normally, to build a restaurant out and open it, you take around 2 years. From concept to opening the doors, and that went from concept to opening the doors in 3 months. And finding funding, and it was fucking bonkers.
And I realized too, we jumped right into talking about Masala y Maiz. So for, you know, a quick and dirty kind of, when did you open this space? Where is it?
So
how did you go from Mexico City, or from Oakland to Mexico City?
My partner, not my wife, Norma was in that photo there, co-chef, the better chef, really. She's from Mexico City. We met working in Oakland, cooking in the Bay Area, and she collaborated a lot with People's Kitchen Collective. She was moving back here to work with corn and do more research around corn and work more closely with native corn varietals. And I was spending time kind of visiting her here in the DF and splitting time between Oakland and Mexico City. And at that point, I'd been doing People's Kitchen Collective for many, many years. I was tired, I was burnt out. I didn't really know what to do next in the Bay Area. The Bay's always been home for me, but I was working 3 jobs just to pay rent, dealing with evictions all the time. I just felt like that the Bay Area, with its like fast changing gentrification, like wasn't feeling like home anymore in the same way that it had in the past. And I wanted to do something different. I wasn't sure what that was yet. And we were kind of the opportunity to take this space and open a restaurant that kind of fell in our lap. And it had to happen really quickly, and we fucking jumped on it. As we were doing it, we figured out, well, actually, Norma said yes first. She was doing it, and then basically told me, like, look, I'm going to open a restaurant here. You're welcome to do this with me or not. Like, I saw Post Kitchen Collective. Yeah, she's like, but we got to make a plan quickly. And I basically like sold my car, packed up my house, broke my lease, and moved to Mexico City in the course of 3 weeks, and changed my life. And we did this thing. We were working it hard, and we were ready to open. And then the earthquake that we were actually scheduled to open. And then the earthquake happened about a few days before we were set to open.
And this is in 2017.
Yeah, the big earthquake in 2017. So we pivoted and fucking changed it up, and we decided to open the restaurant as a community kitchen. So for the first month, 8 days a week, we served free meals and delivered free meals throughout the city. So it was 800 meals a day. There was all like healthy, nutritious. I'm gonna be awkward. I'm trying to plug my phone in. Like healthy, nutritious meals that were just served all across, that were delivered all across the city to different disaster sites. And we did that for a while until we felt that the city was ready. And then we slowly opened with a menu and kind of slowly figured out what it is that we wanted to do and how we were gonna move the restaurant forward.
Amazing. And if I could stop there just to check in with my students, or remind my students in terms of this being an actual practice of mutual aid, right? Like you all saw a need in terms of an emergency in the community. You are a member of that community. You and Norma live there, and you have staff who were from there, born and raised. And rather than, I mean, one, I can't imagine you could necessarily open the restaurant in the same form anyway, since folks are not able to move around in the same way if there's, you know, massive upheaval with an earthquake. But then also seeing the need, right? Seeing the need that folks need food and folks need, right, comfort at that moment, and providing for that need, I think is a really beautiful example of mutual aid there.
Yeah, and that's kind of been we wrote the business model, and kind of the basis of Masala y Maiz at its core. It is as, of course, a food project as a restaurant, but also deeply involved in politics and community organizing and justice, and looking at how can we use the restaurant to better resource our staff, our work, like the people involved, the staff, the farmers, everyone involved in the restaurant, basically. Like, how do we make sure everyone has a higher standard of living through this restaurant, and basically use the restaurant as a resource for the community. So that's like everything from that is involved in every aspect of what we do, and how we do things and how we operate, and it's a whole bunch.
And so can I ask then, before we open it up to questions from folks if they have it, so if you have a question, please put it in the chat, or I'll open up the video and voice calls, or, you know, voice option for folks to ask the question of you directly. You know, what's happening now in terms of yourself and the kitchen and your workers in Mexico City with the pandemic?
It's fucked. It's deeply, deeply fucked. And, you know, it's kind of making it so like the restaurant industry again needs to change, to be better and change a lot, kind of reinvent itself. But it's been really hard, of course, hard for our staff, hard for us. Like, thankfully I mean, as this pandemic started, we were the first restaurant to shut down in the city, and we made the call to
Wow.
other restaurants to follow suit, and made a call to the government to close restaurants down. But we'd been through this before, right? Like when we opened Masala y Maiz at that old location that you saw in the photos, right? The earthquake happened, and that was our first month of being open. And then we were open for 6 months, and then a government official came and tried to get us to pay a bribe, and we refused. And then so they shut us down for 6 months. And we fought in a big anti-corruption campaign, this big like organizing campaign to be able to reopen. So we knew that there was always a possibility of being shut down or being closed. So we'd created a savings. We kind of, again, reorganized how our business model is, and kind of restructured to give as much safety and support to staff as possible. So when this happened, we were a little bit prepared, not much, but we kind of went into it a little bit more calmly than I think we would have had we not experienced being closed for 6 months before and getting through that. Now, during this time, we're not doing takeout. We're not doing any delivery. We're not doing any of that stuff because we don't want to put our staff at risk. Everyone's still on payroll. Norm and I are hustling hard to make sure it stays that way. And that we're basically, again, rewriting our business model, recreating how we're doing things to make sure that our staff is taken care of. The restaurant, we moved the restaurant about 8 months ago into a new location. Kind of our popularity and our status as a restaurant has gone up a lot. And what we're known for and how we're known has changed a lot. But we're still like this radical leftist restaurant project. We're still fucking weird and shit. But the visibility and responsibility has grown exponentially. So we're trying to figure out how we respond to that.
Yeah, and how you can model it for other folks who might have the more means, right?
Yeah.
To be able to shift how things are done there, for sure.
Exactly. And so much of this is what we're doing right now. So much of it is based off of mutual aid, right? And we're tapping back into our roots as community organizers and looking at, like, again, now how do we use the restaurant as a resource to create, basically to provide aid, but also to provide resources and share resources with our community, not just our staff and our farmers who basically that we've already set up as a mutual aid group, right? There's, of course, like the labor part of it where we're all working together, but then there's ways that we share resources amongst the staff and farmers that we've been doing for a long time now. So we already have that structure. But now it's like, how do we use this model and spread it?
Yeah. And I see that there's a question in the chat asking you, Saqib, what kinds of groups did you advocate for when you lived in the Bay and why? And do you need water or to take a break for like 2 seconds?
No, I'm fasting, so
Okay.
I can't drink water. I've still got a couple hours until the sun goes down here.
Okay. Thank you for coming to speak to us. I know
no
it's the beginning of
but that's why my voice sounds so weird. So groups that we advocated for a lot. Over the many years. I would say, let's see, with People's Kitchen Collective, we always try to work with groups that weren't necessarily nonprofits, like not official nonprofits, groups that wouldn't get access to grant money or were too small to get grant funding. Again, this was during a time when the grant world has changed a lot in the past 6 years, I'd say, but we would focus a lot with grassroots groups. So immigrant rights groups that were doing on the ground work, basically like, literally like, what are some names I could tell? Sariwa is a great example. Sariwa is like this Filipinx, like a community group that does like food and farming and youth work, and just, it's a cool group of Filipinx like activists that have been doing programming in their communities. Another one was Bay Area Solidarity Summer, which is like a group of South Asian activists that have really delved into spreading like the leftist history of the South Asian diaspora, and providing like a summer training program for youth to become activists in their own communities. A lot of food and farming justice rights organizations, a lot of like houseless organizations are organizing with houseless people and resourcing houseless people. They were by and for and led by houseless people in the Bay Area. Let's see. It's a project called Black Like Me that was really cool. There was a group of community members in West Oakland that had created a Black history card game. And we're using that as a way of doing radical youth-based organizing in the neighborhood. And like all of these groups, right, these are just collections of people. This is not like official nonprofit with offices and stuff. These are just groups of folks who are doing work in their neighborhoods, who like a little bit of money and a lot of like support would really help out.
And I think it's a really good example too of, in our classes, we've been talking about the difference between mutual aid groups or solidarity groups from official charities and nonprofits, right? In terms of structure and then accountability, like what you're naming are folks of people who come together to serve their community, right? Who are there with and for themselves, right? And are making larger structural critiques as much as they're providing direct service or education or even like kids programming, right? It's part of a larger holistic conversation about how can we make our communities healthy. And for me to, it might be hard for some folks to think about the connections between food justice and, Black Lives Matter campaigns against police brutality, right? But the work that you've been doing continually does that, thinking about who has access even to clean water, safe water, fresh food, safety of body, right? In spaces.
And that's just some of the groups that come to mind. I mean, imagine like doing monthly meals over the course of 12 years. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of projects that we're focused on. One of the ways that we do this organizing work, is I think the important thing in mutual aid and solidarity organizing is like you find your people and then find your people's people. So a lot of like People's Kitchen is like network. So we start really small with Sita Jocelyn and I and expand as more people come in. So we're finding out who their people are and trying to build a broad network, but make sure that the network actually serves everyone, that everyone can be engaged and resourced by it, and that's useful. There's been like long stretches of time where we haven't done anything because it didn't feel like that it was useful at that time. We stopped doing meals for a year or two because it just felt like we were missing the mark, and it felt like a poor use of resources. We're in one of those periods right now where we're trying to figure out like what's the purpose of People's Kitchen Collective right now. We're working on a book and then documenting this like 12 years of work. But really trying to think of, okay, so much has changed since we started, and now we're trying to rethink this whole model again, and doing that by talking to our people and talking to our people's people and looking at what has worked and what hasn't worked and how do we reimagine it to move forward and be more sustainable with more hands and make it more useful.
And that's a really good example again for other kinds of imaginaries of organizing, right? Realizing that there's a time and a place for kind of active mobilization and on the ground work. And also there needs to be times to reflect and pause and reassess so that you can be more effective in the next kind of iteration. Because this is a long-term movement. It's not just a one-time event. And there you are again. I thought we lost you. Maybe we are a little bit. Maybe just one more question, because I do want to be mindful of your time and everyone else's. It's coming from Beverly Natus. She had the privilege and joy of eating with me at your restaurant last summer and is also faculty at UW-Tacoma teaching social practice art. And Beverly's asking, are there other radical small restaurants that you consider peers? If so, do you have the capacity to organize with peers internationally?
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool restaurant, and especially, like I said, the restaurant industry has changed a lot in the last couple of years. There's been a big coming to terms with labor and with race and gender and abuse and sexualized violence in the restaurant industry. We have, the restaurants that Norma and I both came up in, we rely on them a lot. Our chef mentors, we're relying on them a lot. But I see projects like Makamham in Oakland is really cool. It's a cafe. It's started by two Ohlone men who have basically created an Ohlone restaurant, right? This indigenous restaurant. But the way they're using the restaurant as a cultural space is really inspiring and cool to follow their work. And basically with Masala y Maiz, we're always looking at like other restaurants around the world who are using it as a platform to do social change work. And we find that like people come out of the woodwork. Since we've opened, it's been really cool because we feel less alone. We're really outspoken about our politics at the restaurant. When you sit down and you open the menu, the first thing you'll see is like, fuck Trump and his racist immigration policies, fuck Netanyahu, and they're Zionists, and fuck the Zionists, and fuck Modi, and basically it's like long tirade of our enemies, our enemies of the people. But it's a way of, again, for us to start conversations at the table, right? So then when the servers go to the table, the guests usually have questions about like, what the fuck, like, I've never seen this on the menu. Why is this here? And then we can start talking to people about militarization or Zionism or white supremacy or
that's amazing. Yeah.
And like
using
the dessert,
that.
yeah, like the dessert course has white supremacy as terrorism in Spanish and English written throughout it, like things like that, which
that
allow
space.
us.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of blowback on that?
Oh yeah,
guests?
It's fun. Yeah. But here's the great thing about having your own business is you can tell people to fuck off, which I do often, because we don't need to cater to Zionists and racists and white supremacists and folks who are transphobic and who's got the time? And they're like, well, you don't want to discuss it? Like, no, I don't have to. It's my restaurant. Get out. You're not going to like this food anyways.
So it's taking food sovereignty to another level too. It's thinking about when you actually, right, are able to control your menu and be in a collective of workers, you can use that space to express your values.
Yeah, and it's not just our values, right? It's also our staff's values. Like the narrative is always formed by the whole crew together, and we kind of decide on what is going to be the messaging. What is the issues that we're going to be discussing in our staff meetings and with our staff, with our guests, what's going to be up on the walls. It's been really cool to see how we can use the restaurant, the dining room space in particular, to push these conversations, especially as we're kind of being put into this, our what do you call it? Like our profile as a restaurant is going up. We're going into predominantly with, I'm just going to pat ourselves on the back, but like we're against a lot of, like we're in realm with a lot of fine dining, 50 world's best restaurants, and it's really crazy. You see like all these Michelin starred restaurants and then us. And so people come to our restaurant expecting like some type of Michelin starred shit. And they'll see us in our like denim, long shirts and aprons, and it's very different, right? The music is super different, and you just see like fuck Trump and fuck white supremacy spread through the menu, and it's a very different vibe, but it's our vibe. And it's our staff who have a lot of autonomy in the space to engage with guests however they feel safe to do so. It's our farmers who are like actively involved in the restaurant, in the day-to-day operations, what we're doing. It's a lot of different stuff. But it's a way for us to look at like, what is our ideal restaurant, our ideal work environment, and how do we create kind of, again, like decolonize a restaurant, but how do we create the restaurant of our dreams? That's more than just a capitalist project, but more of a community-based project, like a tool.
Awesome. And I think thinking about the restaurant of our dreams is a really nice place to maybe transition to closing out in terms of, you know, I'm thinking about what it means now to be doing any kind of solidarity work or any kind of political work in all these different spaces, through restaurants, through art, through, right, creative venues that may not look exactly the same as other necessary actions like protests in the streets, right? And I'm wondering if maybe you could share for yourself and for the communities that you're really part of, what your dreams are, right? For what's to come, because we need to be thinking long term, right, about
Yeah.
how to kick this thing. And I don't just mean the virus.
Yeah. Well, the virus is, this is a product of capitalism and white supremacy and colonization. And like, it's just, it's showing the cracks in the system and how desperately we need new structures and new systems and new ways of thinking that hold us safe and hold us together closer. Right? So that's how we're looking at the restaurant, and we don't have a solution yet. Yeah. I don't know any restaurants that really do. We're all kind of, especially small restaurants, it's like chef-owned restaurants, where we're the ones working every day. We're the ones putting in 16 hours each day. We're really trying to think about, okay, how do we do this? How do we recreate this, but in a way that's safer for everyone involved and more supportive. So we're looking at, again, collective structures. We're looking at redoing the business plan again, recreating our organizational model. But I don't know, our answers are always in our community. And I don't mean that to sound like kind of like that's going to be a magic like a magic buzzword that makes every community, doesn't make everything better, but it's a way of looking at our problems in scale and kind of looking at who's got other solutions, who's got other ideas, and knowing that we're not alone in this, right? So much of what you all in this course have been discussing is mutual aid and solidarity. You've been looking at the Panthers and their survival programs. Fucked up shit's been happening for a long time. And the solutions are out there. They've been done. So what we're trying to look at in the way we think about our restaurant or in the future of People's Kitchen Collective is looking back at these organizational structures that have happened before us that have worked. Both projects are really deeply rooted in the Panthers and the teachings of the Black Panther Party, especially the Free Breakfast Program, and there are other survival programs. So I'm thinking a lot about how they created structures that served the most in need, that were sustainable, and that got down to the root causes of the issues, right? Angela Davis, her famous quote, of course, is "Radical simply means grasping things at the root." So in thinking about the future of the restaurant industry or the future of community organizing, how we work to create the new future that we want, I think we all need to really get down to the root causes of what hasn't been working for us. And we know that is capitalism. We know that's been racism, systemic oppression, white supremacy. So, really small shit, no big deal to deal with.
Just small
but we have this opportunity to create ourselves, to try something new, to better ourselves. And I think trying new shit, seeing what works, what doesn't work, is the most potent thing that we can be doing right now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I hope that was helpful. It's really
I think
strange.
So. I mean, hopefully other folks out there. Oh, people are thanking us. Cool. It is funny
to be talking about this. Like normally I'd be I talk to a class and like there's a lot of Q&A and we engage with each other. This is really strange just be saying this to my phone.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to come off a video and just say hi to us for 2 seconds?
Yeah, I do.
It's Beverly. Hi.
Hey, Beverly.
Hey, thank you, Saqib. It's so great to see you. And hear the story behind the restaurant in detail. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And here I am via video in Tacoma, Washington. And I've been on Zoom all day long with students.
This shit's fucking crazy.
Yeah, I am zoomed out.
Yeah.
I'm going out in the garden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me to put this out to then. So not Zoom, but for anyone on this call that wants more information or resources, or feel free to send me an email. Dr. T, if you want to, you're welcome to share my email with your students.
Sure.
And if you've got questions or something that interests you, or if you're interested in doing this type of food work or getting into the food industry, feel free to reach out. And whatever I can do to be of support, or refer you to people who might be able to support you better, be happy to do so.
Awesome.
I've got so much time and so much anxiety now, so just reach out.
Thank you so much for sharing your time. And I put in the chat if folks want to grab those, the two .coms from Masala y Maiz and People's Kitchen Collective. But Masala y Maiz has the best food photos on Instagram, I think. I love going through your back log.
Yeah, Norma does all the Instagram and she's fucking killing it. But yeah,
I'm getting very hungry. Yeah.
The new restaurant's really beautiful. It's in collaboration with some really brilliant, like radical designers and artists, and there's some cool shit happening. And if you come down to Mexico City, hit me up.
I hope we're all able to do that very soon.
Yeah. We'll see.
Thank you all for calling in. I'm going to end the recording now, and I really appreciate everyone's time. So for sure, if you have questions for Saqib that we didn't get to ask, we can post it even in the discussion board this week if you're in my class, or pass me an email and I can certainly pass it on to Saqib and connect you all that way. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for calling in and coming in today. Bye-bye.
Bye, friends.
Whoops. And if you're in my class and want to stay and ask me a question, you can do that too. Okay. Saqib.
I'm gonna leave.
Bye-bye.